3. Let's talk opinions with Russell Brown over at publicaddress.net, the Hard News blog there, also the Media 7 show on TVNZ7. Russell Brown, good morning.
Good morning.
And let's talk about the Media 7 show this week. It's focusing on Christchurch.
Yeah, it's actually the first show we've ever done without a studio recording.
Oh, really? So you were down in Christchurch?
Yeah. We basically made last week's show on Wednesday evening, and Jose Barbosa and I got up very early and flew to Christchurch and set about putting together a show between the two of us.
And you were in the red zone, weren't you?
Yeah, we did get to go into the red zone. And I actually felt, to be honest, I felt a little bit guilty about that because, as we've seen since, once they opened the lines for the bus tours, people really wanted to get in there and see what had happened.
Yeah.
So I did feel a slight twinge of guilt that I was getting in there before so many Christchurch people. But it was interesting. I think the sites that we found most affecting were not the big ones, because we've seen those in a way. It's the small sites. It's the shops that have still got their wares in the window.
Yeah.
And particularly, there's a fashion shop on the corner of Chewham and High Streets where the front window's blown out, and at some point the owners have obviously managed to get in and remove the clothes from the mannequins, but the mannequins are still there, and they're suspended from the ceiling on nylon and turning slowly in the wind.
Oh, God.
And it was,
Yeah.
And the wind was, was sort of howling, and it just felt very strange and desolate.
Real ghost town kind of stuff.
But I have to say, in general, though, in Christchurch, I mean, last time I went down, I've been down once before since February.
Yeah.
And last time I came back pretty sobered. And I really thought, man, I can't see how they turn this around in a way. It just seemed to be seeping out from the cordon. And yet this time I get the impression, I came back quite inspired. There was stuff going on, and most of it, I get the impression is being driven by ordinary people. Officialdom, I think there's still a problem there, and possibly a growing problem. People are getting quite frustrated with how slow everything happens. But on the other hand, we talked to Coralie Wynn from Gap Filler, who are basically trying to make something of all the empty sections that are springing up in the inner city, and there's a lot, because half the buildings have been demolished.
Well, you see some of these aerial photographs being taken, and there's not a lot left.
Exactly, and what Gap Filler have been doing is trying to do something with those sections, whether it's little parks in conjunction with another group called Greening the Rubble. But what we looked at was the so-called book fridge, which is just such a great idea, particularly with the city library still closed. Basically, they managed to get a commercial chiller from a burger bar. They paid for it.
Yeah.
And have filled it full of books.
Okay.
And it is a book exchange. It's not locked. It's not monitored.
Oh, the whole thing, like leaving a book on a seat and replacing it.
On a slightly bigger scale.
Right.
And it absolutely is being used. We were there for maybe 3/4 of an hour shooting, maybe an hour or so.
Yeah.
And 3 people came up, little old ladies coming up, bringing one book back and exchanging it for another one.
That's cool.
I just thought that was very neat, actually.
Yeah.
Also, we've interviewed Gerard Smythe, who is the director of When a City Falls, which is the documentary movie that opens at the end of this month. And I'm really looking forward to that. I only saw a few bits of the movie, but I was very impressed with Gerard, who is actually, he's an inner city resident.
Yeah.
He's outside the cordon, but he's inside the 4 avenues. And he's on Oxford Terrace, where a lot of buildings bit the dust. So it's a film with a very, very strong sense of place. Yeah. It's a film by and about someone who lives in the inner city.
We're hearing more and more about these stories, though. There, as you say, there are a lot of positive stories, but there's still a lot of negative stories about. You hear about contractors who seem to be a bit cowboyish, going about things. Stuff goes missing from people's buildings.
Yeah.
Owners aren't told that things are being demolished and not getting a chance to get stuff out. For me personally, and this is obviously a very controversial thing to say, but what this tells me, let's say this happened in Auckland, right? And I was in a particular building and I had my stuff in there. I would be now more likely to run back into that building to grab the things that were most important after the earthquake and get them out, because I may never be able to get back in there and get them, even though the building is still standing.
Yeah, talk to anyone who had premises inside the red zone, and they'll tell you that.
They will do that.
Rather than just run out and they would, if necessary, bust open your computer and rip out the hard drive.
Yeah.
I think everyone thinks that now. And I really think it could have been better managed because there are people who have had to leave behind that stuff, and the buildings have just been skittled.
Yeah.
And in some cases, Jared Smythe told us he's just nearby Pico, the old health food store, in the sort of greeny part by Oxford Terrace, and he saw someone, a contractor, coming to skittle the whole building. And thought, that can't be right. He rang the owners who he knew. They got down there really quickly and queried it. And it turned out, no, the instruction wasn't to demolish the whole building. And I suspect that's happened over and over again.
Yeah.
That is of great concern. The other thing that we went down and had a look at was Seismic, with a C, which is the new online story repository. And I think that's quite exciting. Basically, it's a repository for all the human stories, all the data, and also everything the press has reported will be donated to this open archive, which I think is a really good gesture.
Cool.
Yeah, no, so after, like I said, after coming back last time pretty depressed about the whole thing, this time I thought, okay, maybe things are actually looking up. Okay,
so look forward to that show tomorrow evening after 9 o'clock.
Indeed.
Probably the music awards are on, so I'll catch it on demand.
Yeah, I'll be at the music awards.
Yeah, and let's finally talk about Labour's broadcasting policy they released yesterday, a 4-page document.
Yeah, bits of it are good. Bits of it, I mean, basically, and I'm writing a blog post about this at the moment.
It's a concept, isn't it? Not really a policy.
Late last year, Jonathan Coleman, Nationals Broadcasting Minister, stood up at the Sparta conference and said, what I think should happen is that TVNZ7 should be retained. TVNZ itself should be allowed to, be fully commercial, and all the public broadcasting obligation falls on TVNZ7, which would be funded by the government.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, he said this a number of times. Unfortunately, he lost his argument in cabinet.
Yeah.
He could not convince Stephen Joyce and co. of the merit of doing this. What I find a little bit shocking and surprising is it appears that Claire Curran hasn't been able to convince the Labour caucus of the merit of actually coming up with the money. I mean, they are proposing a new public broadcaster aligned with Radio New Zealand, different boards. All that's all pretty good, but they're not saying where the money comes from. And it's not like it's a lot of money in the scheme of things. It's 10 million, basically. And to outline this policy and then say we will have a national debate and we will go to stakeholders and ask them how it should be funded, just isn't good enough. It's just silly. And I think that's quite a disappointing, element of it. It's a relatively small commitment in the scheme of things. And when you look at the latest audience figures for TVNZ7, it's attracting about 2 million New Zealanders a month.
Significant,
so
isn't
it's being watched. I'm kind of getting this out on the streets as well. People recognise the show and recognise the channel now.
Yeah.
So there's something there worth keeping, and I think that a genuine commitment to at least, keeping the flagship shows on air, and I do think the ship has sailed with respect to TVNZ7 itself. I think
really, you'd think if Labour got back in, they would keep that rolling over until they worked out what the grand scheme.
That might be a good idea. But I think at TVNZ they've been given their writing instructions. They are to be a commercial broadcaster,
right?
And they always resented the charter anyway. So
but that means we're talking about a completely new entity with new studios, new equipment, and everything.
Yeah, although I think that could be done relatively cheaply. I think you do have to look at doing it cheaply, and it would certainly share news resources with Radio New Zealand. If I was doing it, let's say I had 8 to 12 million. If I had 12 million, I think 2 million of that should go to bolstering Radio New Zealand's news services.
Yeah.
because it's going to also be providing services to this new public TV channel.
But then we're not too far away from the idea of radio with pictures.
No, and I do think that John Barnett's idea of the entire day being filled up with radio with pictures, with a camera in the studio, was over the top. I think there's room for a bit of that, but it just makes sense for the two to share resources. I don't think they would necessarily have the same ethos. I think on the TV channel, maybe you've got to look at allowing a bit of branding on. I don't think you can be too pure with that. But, it is, Labor have got some good ideas, but they just really should have said, yeah, we will at least fund it to get through, until we work out how it can be self-sustaining. But, the funny thing is that 6 and 7 were supposed to be self-sustaining by now, but no one ever did anything about it.
No.
Which was the problem, basically.
Indeed. Russell Brown, thanks very much. We'll see your show on Media 7 tomorrow evening after 9 o'clock, and also publicaddress.net. Thanks.
Righto.
See ya.
See ya.
It's now coming up to 5 minutes away